Well, hello. I am so glad you are joining us today. My name is Abby, and I'm the Spiritual Development Director here. And I am honored to continue a series that our pastor, Trey Kelly, began last week about something that we all know and most of us may love, which is social media. If you missed his start to this series last week, I'm going to encourage you to go and download our app to listen to his message because he covered some amazing content. But one of the things he left us with last week is he asked us all to consider a question as we interact with whatever platform on social media that we choose, and it's this. When it comes to social media, am I bringing my influence to it, or am I being influenced by it? Now, this question actually intersects two areas that I am very passionate about: influence and communication. I believe one of the reasons that social media has increased in popularity over the last few years is because it has given all of us a platform of influence to communicate what we think, know, and feel. But as it has increased in popularity, we've also seen statistically that it has had a negative impact on our mental health and healthy connections. Because in certain situations, social media has actually been used to replace real human interaction. Social media can be an effective way to leverage our communication influence, but we have to learn to respect the weight of this platform and understand what it can do and what it can't. I am passionate about people discovering that better is possible. I'm actually in school right now working on my bachelor's in psychology because I'm fascinated by how we learn, grow, develop, get stuck, and interact with one another. Here at Wellspring, as a spiritual development director, I've actually been a part of some amazing stories here, and I have seen where communication has been a major roadblock in some of those relationships here. But I've also seen where a second chance at communication has led to freedom and restoration. Think about a time that you said something that was misunderstood. And I said this, you heard that situation. Think about that relationship and how you knew you had to correct that misunderstanding. What did they say to you? How did they act? And how did you correct your miscommunication? I see this played out in my house all the time. My husband, Grant, and I have two beautiful children, Kylie and Miles. Now, they have completely different communication styles. Kylie is my firstborn. She is big and bold and wonderfully fierce, but she is efficient at delivering information. Now, Miles is my tender-hearted, stop and smell the roses kid. He hears tone first and the message second. Just a few weeks ago, I saw the communication styles play out differently when I sent Kylie upstairs to deliver a message to Miles to put your socks and shoes on because we had to leave soon. Now, Kylie marched up the stairs, fully embracing the firstbornness that she has and her leadership that she had been trusted with, and I believe delivered the message exactly as given to her brother. Well, her brother heard a few things louder than that message. Number one, when Kylie came up, he thought he had missed the original message from me. So he thought he had disappointed me. He was most likely playing on his tablet or feeding his fish, so he was distracted. And so when she delivered that information with the efficiency that she is excellent at doing, he heard her yelling instead of just confident. And finally, he heard in her tone a rush that will short-circuit him every time. Now, how did I know there had been a miscommunication? Well, Miles walked down the stairs in tears, without socks and shoes, and I realized that somewhere along the way we had gotten lost. So we reaffirmed their relationship and had to re-communicate the message in the proper context. Now I want you to think about a social media encounter that you have had lately that's left you feeling angry, hurt, or misunderstood. If you're on social media in any capacity, I guarantee it didn't take you long. Because every day on social media, we encounter things that upset us. We encounter things that our friends have posted that we wish we didn't see. Every day we scroll our friends list and see people that we have allowed to communicate and have influence in our lives disappoint us. Whether it's something they posted that you wish you never saw, something you weren't invited to, or something that you didn't understand that they felt that way about a certain issue. In reality, when we feel hurt or rejected, it is because somebody is communicating something that we value in a way that devalues it. Now, on social media, is that their intent? I don't know. And how do you know? See, I think these examples give us our first observation about social media communication, and it's this. It has to do with something called dialogue. Dialogue is a conversation between two people exchanging thoughts and ideas. Now, I believe that when we try to dialogue on social media, we actually engage in disconnected communication because we are talking about meaningful issues, issues that need us to engage, issues that need us to solve them, issues that we need to collectively value. But when we engage and try to engage in dialogue on social media, we disconnect from the people that we are talking to. And if we're not careful, that disconnected communication gets us nowhere fast. So to prove that today, I want to actually talk to you about what healthy dialogue requires and why social media might not be the best place to try that. So healthy dialogue requires a few things. The first one is time. Think of a deep conversation you had with a friend where you discussed big ideas and deep ideals. Was that a quick conversation? Most likely it wasn't, because a healthy dialogue requires time for everyone to display their side of the argument, to share their values and why they think their side is right. And social media, though, gives us an amazing platform to have quick communication, but it also gives us the ability to decide instantly whether we like something or not, or whether we agree with it or not. Social media is wonderful for that instant communication, but it is here today and gone in the next 5 minutes, which means it really lacks connection. Now, social media allows us to be overly connected without a true support system. There are no roots to our online friendships. Think about your friends list on whatever social media platform you have versus the friends that you would invite over to dinner or out to coffee or lunch. There is a lack of connection in our digital friendships, which actually makes the next one difficult, which is accountability. Think about that story where there was a miscommunication on your end, or even my story of Kylie and Miles. Accountability in communication pays attention to another's body language. It remains in the same space. It looks the person in the eye and owns the weight of their words. Now, because I care about those that I communicate with, if I were to say something hurtful, or if I were to see you respond in a negative way, I would take that moment instantly to either re-communicate the message in the proper context, or I would share that I know that that might be hurtful for you to hear, but here's why I think that this is helpful for you. Social media actually removes a care component to difficult dialogue, which it makes it really difficult for the last thing that healthy dialogue requires, which is respect. Now, healthy dialogue has to have respect for and from both parties. We will never be able to engage in healthy dialogue if we don't have a baseline of respect for the person that we are communicating with. Disdain, frustration, and disgust are just too difficult to disguise. Now, we've all seen this play out wrong on social media, where our communication has gone sideways in some way. Think of an ugly social media discourse where it was apparent that the participants weren't listening to each other. Or maybe you selected the wrong response on Facebook. I know that healthy dialogue does not begin with, why did Abby just ha-ha at me having a flat tire? Side note, have you ever been curious about which response you were actually supposed to select? Do I like this? Do I love this? Do they love this? Maybe I should just select wow to be safe. I'm not sure about you, but sometimes I believe like is just not a strong enough response to what I see. Or have you ever muted a friend due to their posts only to have them hurt that you didn't understand that they were going through a difficult situation at the very same time? I'm sure you could think of more examples where communication goes wrong on social media, but these are all signs of a disconnected dialogue. As Trey said last week, social media isn't inherently bad. I believe we can use social media to be a part of a healthy dialogue and healthy communication, but we must remember the question we've been asking, and it's this. When it comes to social media, am I bringing my influence to it, or am I being influenced by it? I am an idealist by nature. This doesn't mean I see everything positively, but it means that I see people, outcome, and circumstances in what I would consider ideal. Now, I know this can be subjective in nature, so I'm going to invite you in on the process this morning as we consider what an ideal social media encounter looks like. Before we do that, I want to remind you of something that you most likely have heard about before, and it is the fight or flight response. Whenever we encounter something stressful, all of us have an innate instinctual response to either fight or to flee from the stressor. Remember that encounter that you had on social media that made you angry, hurt, or upset? Well, that was a stressful encounter. All of us have this on social media. Things that make us say, are they talking about me? Why wasn't I invited? Why would they say that? Is that really how they feel? Our response to our external physical environment is the same response that we have to digital threat and stress. As an idealist, I imagine things often, so I want to invite you to imagine with me what your ideal social media encounter is. If you are in the flight camp, what does that look like? Is it a community sharing pictures of their family, a vacation, of their food? Lots of likes, thumbs up, and happy comments. Maybe it's a political post or a hot topic that has comments like, "Thanks for sharing this interesting article." Or maybe you don't even look at the comment section on those. For those in the fight camp, what does it look like for you? Again, the pets, the food, the vacations. We love sharing these things on social media. But as a fighter on social media, you usually know you're dealing with one when they use words like theoretically, in reality, or actually before they start their comment. As a fighter myself, I love to be challenged. So for me, an ideal post looks like something that challenges a way I believe or a thing that I know. It looks like respectful discourse between friends or even people that don't even know each other. It even looks like political posts that aren't insistent on changing my heart on a matter, but that change my thoughts in my mind towards another's perspective. Both of these, whether you are in the fight or the flight camp, share the need to be valued and respected by the people behind the statement and not just the statement. Now, stop imagining and hear this reality. What you just envisioned is possible. It's possible in our church, it's possible in our community, and it's possible in our world. I told you I'm an idealist. But this idealism isn't rooted in a pie-in-the-sky hope or just something that I would like to say. It is rooted in a promise that we say here often, that better is possible. But today I don't want you to take my word for it. Instead, I want to introduce you to the writings of an early church leader who I believe has some great insight for us. And his name is Peter. Now, Peter was a close follower with Jesus, and I love his story because he was a gruff fisherman whose life was radically changed by a friendship with Jesus. Peter was a fighter, but in a moment that it all mattered, right before Jesus was about to be killed, Peter fled from the man who had changed his life and actually rejected Jesus. Because he has insight on both of those, I believe he is the perfect person to speak into what we are learning about today. So we're going to be looking at Peter's second letter to the early church. If you have your Bibles right there, you can go ahead and turn to 2 Peter chapter 1. That's where we're going to be today. If not, the verses will be here on the screen. But we're actually going to start in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. And this passage that we're going to talk about lays out a process for how we can have better influence in our relationships. Let's get started. It says, "His divine power has given us everything required for life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness." Now, everything we need to do better has been given to us through coming to know Jesus. I know that some of you watching may have just stumbled upon this because you're on Facebook and this popped up, or a friend invited you to watch Wellspring online with them, and I am so glad you're here. If you don't believe in Jesus, or if you are still wondering what this faith thing is and if it's for you, I hope that you learned something today that you can apply to your life, because Peter continues in the very next verse and says that better is possible for all of us, and this is how he says it. "By these he has given us very great and precious promises, so that through them you may share in the divine nature, escaping the corruptions that is in the world because of evil desires." Now, this verse starts off so good, but I was cringing a little by the end. A corruption caused by evil desires. Well, other translations say corruption caused by human desires. Peter and Jesus didn't have social media back in the day, but they are talking to churches, but Peter is talking to a church, an early church, that is engaging in communication and relationships, that they have the opportunity to share God's divine nature with those that they interact with. Think about social media. We say that we post on social media, but we also say that we share on our platforms. What are we actually sharing? Now, if you feel a little bit of tension with that question, you are not alone with that today. I think it's okay to sit with tension sometimes when we're dealing with big topics. But think of somebody that you know that has all of the tools necessary to do the task that is before them, and they choose not to use it. How do you feel about that? Are you angry at them? Do you pity them? Well, according to Peter, we have all of the tools necessary to do the work of having healthy dialogue. We are able to engage in it and share in it, but if we don't use these tools, we miss out on having conversations and engaging in relationships that draw people to God's nature. Now, what does God's nature look like? Well, God's nature is He is gentle, loving, compassionate, just, merciful, honest, and because He is all those things and so much more, He not only tells us that He gives us everything, He reveals the process in the next few verses. Let's keep reading. For this very reason, make every effort to supplement. Now, supplement here means to add or to enhance. So as we talk about this process, I want you to remember that we are adding things as we go. This is a process, not a one-time and done and you have healthy dialogue. So for this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with goodness. Now, all relationships begin with faith. We meet somebody and we have faith that this person might be a best friend for life, or this person might be somebody that we want to spend the rest of our lives with. On social media, we see somebody post something and we have faith that they might share content that we agree with or that makes us laugh. Well, our relationship with Jesus begins the very same way. It begins with faith. But faith that produces life change in our lives begins to understand that Jesus is who He says He is, and our lives begin to reflect a goodness because of this. This comes from allowing Him to change our thought patterns and behaviors, which leads to goodness with knowledge. Remember, we are supplementing, so we're adding knowledge to our goodness. Active application of faith through life change should increase our knowledge of God and others, which increases our empathy, which leads to knowledge with self-control. Now, knowledge leads to wisdom, and wisdom in action allows us to know when to respond and how to respond, or when not to. Next is self-control with endurance. Reactions don't just happen as flash in the pan, strike while the iron is hot, but instead produce strong, steady, long-suffering, which is another word for patience, for the duration of the relationship. Next is endurance with godliness. Now here's where we start to get into the fun part. Long-suffering is to have the mind of Christ. Remember, long-suffering is patience. The author of Hebrews says in Hebrews 12:2 that Jesus actually models perseverance to us up to death on a cross for our sake. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I know I don't encounter a physical cross in my day-to-day encounters. But when we begin to practice patience, our lives begin to reflect a faith not only in God, but a likeness to His character. Next, we have godliness with brotherly affection. Beginning to see others how God sees them is the response to following the process up to this point. This allows us to have kind thoughts towards others and understand how God sees them. Do you know how God sees you? The author of Psalms says in Psalms 139:17 that, God, how precious your thoughts are to me, how vast they are. That is exactly how God feels about you. He has kind thoughts towards you and me, and even those that we disagree with, which leads us to the end of this process, which is brotherly affection with love. Now, actions and responses rooted in faith, empathy, knowledge, and wisdom with patience and goals of maintaining long-standing relationships that have the mind and kindness of Christ can only be a response of love. So now, why does this matter? Well, unhealthy communication on social media happens when we don't respect this process. We don't leverage the right platform at the right time. We expect those that we post to jump from liking what we've said to loving it and agreeing with it. Conversely, we've all seen something awful on social media that has left us wondering if this friendship is actually what I thought it was. And instead of engaging with them where they may have gotten off on the process, we jump to writing them off immediately. When this happens, we miss an opportunity to bring our influence to a situation. Now, Peter says in verse 10 exactly why we should not grow tired of applying this process to in-person and online communication, and it's this. Therefore, brothers and sisters, make every effort to confirm your calling and election. This is important. To confirm your calling and my calling, not their calling. Because if you do these things, you will never stumble. When we try to apply what God is doing in our lives to other people, we miss out on the growth that God is actually doing in our lives. So we are responsible for our responses, for how we engage in the healthy dialogue process. We can be less concerned about others' responses when we take full ownership of ours. So now what if, instead of demanding that the process look the way you wanted it or look the way I wanted it, what if instead we accepted the process in each other and ourselves? What if we looked for ways to meet those that we disagree with exactly where they are in the process? Do they need knowledge or wisdom? Instead of blasting them on social media for the fighters or passively subtweeting them, what if instead we invited them to lunch or coffee and brought a book that helped us gain a different perspective on the topic that they're struggling with? Or what if we see somebody that needs brotherly affection? What if we just showed them friendship? I know that I have said some hateful things from a hurt-filled place. And if some important people in my life didn't see past the words that I spoke and the heart that lay underneath, well, I don't know if I'd be here today. Some incredible leaders saw that I was hurting and that I was misguided in my thoughts and behaviors, and they stepped in. They engaged with me. There are broken things in our world that need our attention. And social media gives us an amazing platform to give the voiceless a voice and to shine light in the dark. But I want all of us to ask, are we doing this effectively? So healthy dialogue does not require us to fight for what we believe is right or to flee from what we want to ignore. Instead, healthy dialogue requires that we engage with the things that we value. This week, I want to encourage you to look for opportunities to engage in the process of healthy dialogue. When you encounter a friend on social media that leaves you feeling angry, hurt, or sad, ask yourself these questions. First, ask yourself, do I want to engage in healthy dialogue? Do I have the time, connection, accountability, and respect to engage in this? If your answer is no, that is okay. Taking the time to pause before you post might be the most loving thing you can do this week. Next, ask, is this the right platform for healthy dialogue? Now, this question might mean that you have to go to a different platform. It might mean sending a private message or sending a text message, making a phone call, inviting them out for coffee or lunch. Social media is good for a lot of things, but I hope that you see engaging in healthy dialogue is not one of its strengths. And finally, ask where they are at in the process and where am I? And be honest with yourself. Because remember, connected communication requires faith. And because we are supplementing it, it requires some more things. Faith with goodness, knowledge, self-control, endurance, godliness, brotherly affection, and love. The amazing thing about connected communication is that God not only provides all that we need, He invites us in on the process. Because as we learned at the very beginning in 2 Peter 1:3, His divine power has given us everything required for life and godliness through the knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and goodness. God says, I have given you everything you need to get to godliness. And it is up to us to choose to respond in brotherly affection and love. See, this is not something forced on us, but it is something provided to us. As we wrap up today, I want to encourage you to look for ways to apply the process this week, to pause when you feel tension or anger and ask God to show how He is providing everything you need to have healthy dialogue. Healthy dialogue does not require us to flee or to argue with things that we disagree with. Instead, it invites us in on the process of drawing people more towards God's divine nature. And remember, He has given you everything you need. You get to choose to respond in love. I hope you will join us next week as Trey continues this series with an amazing message that reveals why there's never been a better time to leverage healthy dialogue in our communities, in our connections, and in our families. So I hope that you will join us, but let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for the process of healthy dialogue. I thank you for the gift that you've given us in the church, that we can encourage and challenge each other to share in your divine nature. Father, I thank you that you do not ask us to do anything that you have not already provided a way. So I pray that this week when we encounter stressors in our life, online and off, that you will remind us that you have provided everything we need to engage in the work that you've given us. Thank you how you call us children and how kind your thoughts are to us, even when we stumble. We love you. Thank you for this message. In Jesus' name, amen.